Okay, good morning, good day. We're on page Kuf Aleph in the Sefer Manechochem, Igeris Beis. The topic, the heading of this section is called Inyan Halu'umiyut, the idea of nationality. Now, over Shabbos, I had a chance to take out the Rambam, to learn the Rambam that Rabbi Yoel cites here, to discuss it with someone who wrote a sefer on the Rambam, Sforim on the Rambam, clarifying the Rambam. And I'm not going to go into all the details, just to tell you that it's worth, at your leisure, to take out Hilchos Gerushin. It's the book of Noshim. This is where we would find the book of Noshim, the laws of Gerushin, chapter 2. I forget what paragraph. You'll find over there, I think it might be paragraph 8 or 9, you'll find over there what Rabbi Yoel cites over here, which the Rebbe quoted thousands of times, that a Jew really wants to do the will of Hashem, and therefore if he gives a get, being forced to give a get, and for that matter, if a Bezdin appoints a Goy or Goyim to force a Jew to give a get, it's a good get. Whereas if Goyim, if a Jew on his own hires a Goy without the Bezdin adjudicating that that's what should be done, it's not a good get. One more point that I learned in clarifying the halacha is that the difference between a get posel, an invalid get, and a get bottle. A get bottle means the nullification of a get. And the Rambam subtly addresses it that the get bottle means that midoraisa, biblically, it's not a good get for whatever reason, as he enumerates over there. Whereas a get posel, I think this is the difference. A get posel is midoraisa, it's good, but only midorabanan, it's no good. So anyway, these details are there. But as far as the point that's relevant to what we're learning here, it's the main point that if a Yid is forced to give a get, and the Rambam says, why? Because Yitzroi Tokvoi. The only reason he didn't want to give the get is because his Yetzer Hara got to him. So when you give him a few klep, the Yetzer Hara keeps quiet and backs off, and then his inner real self comes out, which is to give a get, because now it's warranted to give a get. And clearly, by the way, I think someone asked last week, and the Rambam says in the beginning, we're talking in a case when halachically it's validated to give a get. For example, if you didn't have children in 10 years, halachically the husband can give a get, doesn't have to the wife, right? And other situations like that, where halachically it's warranted that to give a get. But if not, that's a whole different situation. So as it's relevant to our discussion here, Rabbi Yoel says, look at the difference between the Yid who doesn't want to give a get, and is forced to give a get, it's still a good get. Whereas if a Yid hires a Goy on his own, it's not a good get. Whether it's Raisa, whether it's Rabbanan, whatever, those are details. But it's not a good get. Why? Because then it's not coming mipnimius nafshe. It's not coming from his inner thing. It's a business deal. If the wife goes and hires a Goy without the permission of the Bezdin, it's not a good get. And the Rambam says, and the Noisei Kalim, the commentaries, and the Rambam say it's a very simple logic. This way, everyone will go and hire a woman wants out. I want out. What am I going to do? I'm going to get a zhlub. I'm going to get a bulvan. I'm going to get a bouncer. And the bouncer will go and say, you don't do this. Your legs will be chopped off. We won't have civility. So that's why that's not a good get. And that's not pnimius nafshay. But we're talking about in a case when Bezdin says, yes, you should give a get. That is a reason, yes. And you don't want to give a get, then we could force you, because that's really pnimius nafshay. Yes, Hillel.
Is it part of the din that the husband has to know that those are shluchim of Beis Din?
Absolutely. If
They have
not,
to like announce, like the Miranda law or something,
yeah. Otherwise, it's missing in das, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's go to page Kufalef, and we're at the second paragraph. It's towards the bottom of the page. Kishaboyim liyehudi. Okay. Page Kufalef. Kishaboyim liyehudi v'oimrim loi. When you come to a yid and you say to him, Hamayim Razal, Yisrael, the saying of Chazal, Yisrael, a Yid, Aval Pishachata, even though he committed a. Yeah.
I'm sorry, forgive me for interrupting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think actually we finished on Thursday the very, very bottom at Kuf.
No.
Kuf.
No.
The Zohar Thomas.
Okay. I think we learned it, but I don't mind going back. Let's go back to the bottom of Kuf. Here it is, sir. Maybe this is what he read and he went nuts. This is the Taina of the Mizrachiniks and the Agudis. The Pirush Maimed Razal Zeh. They take this phrase, this Razal, Yisrael, Afal Pishachota Yisrael. They take this phrase, even though he sinned, he's still a Jew. They want to prove, now on top of page Kufalef. The Mahusoi Shel Yisrael, they want to prove that the essence of a Jew, who inyan acher mehatorah, is something other than Torah. Uvedugmas Mahusoi Shel Arusi, or Shel Tzarfati, she'ein ze shayach ledas. They compare it to the essence of a Russian, and a Tzarfati that has nothing to do with religion. Says Rabbi Yoel Avabem is Nepechu, it's just the opposite. As the Rebbe said, how people many times when he brought and interpreted and explained this Chazal, the Inyi Yisrael, what is the idea of a Yid? Kesher in Torah. His connection to Torah. You can't separate a Yid from Torah. What is the essence of a Yid? Torah. As we find in the Svarim, She Yisrael, who? Rosh Tevis, what's the acronym of the word Yisrael? Quote, Yesh starts with a Yud, Shishim, right? Yisrael. Yud is Yesh, Sin is Shishim, Reish is Ribui, Aleph is Oisiyos, and Lamed is L'Torah, which means there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. So who is a Yisrael? Who is a Yid? Someone who connects and lives and desires and knows that what is he or she 600,000 Isis letters of the Torah. And if that's not who you are, if that's not something that you believe in, then you're technically you're Yisrael, but in concept, you're not a Jew. You're a nationalist. You're a Russian. You're a Frenchie, and you're a Jew. But it has nothing to do with Torah. But therefore, there's no holiness to you. Let's continue. So what's the meaning? That even someone who did a sin, he still remains a Jew. It's not that he remains a Jew because of a sidebar. As the Agudis say, he remains a Jew because he's connected to Torah. Because in the depth of his heart, he wants to be Mekayim all of Torah. Next paragraph. The publicity of this idea in explaining the Chazal, Yisrael, Yisrael, as the Rebbe is Masber, not that, God forbid, it has any comparison to the idea, to the shita of nationalism of the Zionim. On the contrary, הפוצץ רעין הלזם היא מלחמה הכי גדולה נגד שיטת הציונס. In other words, we have a chazal, Af al pi shechota Yisrael hu. So the Rebbe says that is the total opposite the way we from Yidden, and the way the Rebbe explained, look at it, is the total opposite and contrary to the Shita, to the way the Tziyonim learn Pshat. They learn Pshat, you're a Yid even though you sinned. And why? Because nationalism makes you a Yid. And Rabbi Yoel says that's Heipach the Pshat, the name of the Rebbe, and that it's Heipach the Pshat in the Chazal. Chazal is saying, Af al pi, even though you sinned, Yisrael hu. In other words, so how do you become Yisrael? In other words, the hate, the Avera, the sin, that cannot remove you from being a Yisrael. But first you have to be a Yisrael. How are you a Yisrael? Torah. Not having a flag and not having a Teidut Zut. That's what makes you a Jew. What makes you a Jew is Torah.
Was he referring to religious Zionism?
Yes,
Secular?
of course.
Religious Zionism.
Of course.
Okay.
He's not referring to secular. This whole country is about religious Zionism. It's not about secular Zionists.
No, because a lot of what he's saying makes sense. If you're talking about secular Zionism, the whole point was for them to replace the Yid with an Israeli, meaning like what he's saying. He's saying the Russian is the Russian, the Frenchman is the French, the Israeli is instead of a Yid.
But
I don't know if religious Zionists are saying that. I think that the Zionists,
maybe today they're not saying it, but they did say it in 1880 and in 1920, and it spilled over absolutely. And in 1948 they said it. Please, everyone, that was they didn't say you have to not. Excuse me. They didn't say you shouldn't put on tefillin. No one said you shouldn't put on tefillin. But the question is, what establishes you as a Jew? So the Shita of Zionism, which started with the secularists, well, actually, and it was supported by Frum Rabbanim, like I told you. Moshe got excited. Moshe Epstein bought property in Hadera. You're talking about Litvische Gedolim, Rebbes, Tzaddikim. This was all across. Most were for Zionism. The exception was there was one or two or three Rabbanim or Gedolim that said no. The Rashab was one. The Munkacher was another. And a few others. But most, so Yoel is taking apart. He's not saying here you shouldn't live in Eretz Yisrael, not so doesn't have Kedusha. He's not saying. He's saying, what is your drive? What is the sheet over here? Now the Satmar, they focus on it and they throw out the whole thing. You understand? And Rabbi Yoel is saying is you got to discern between the Shita and the practicality. And to go and say that Lubavitch Chabad has the Shita of the Zionism is pushing a lie. It's not true. So therefore, he has to show that that's the case. And of course, like Issa said before the shir started, some of you weren't on, most of you weren't on, he gave the Sefer to a strong Zionist, a Talmud Chacham, and he spitted the book. And when he opened it up, he saw something because it speaks against Zionism, religious Zionism. So this is a double-edged sword. This is not, and that's why I told you from the beginning. They pick it up, he's speaking against the Satmar. He's speaking just against the Zionists, the religious Zionists. And that's why it's a very sensitive issue. But therefore, you take the Sefer, you learn it, you remove yourself emotionally, very hard to do, but that's what needs to be done, and then you think about it, and then come to your conclusion. It is right, it isn't right, but the reaction that Isser shared seems to me a very emotional reaction. I open a page or two, I see he says something, I didn't read what's before and what's after, it's terrible, he's a nut. Did you read the entire build-up? Do you understand every detail what he's saying? Then you still disagree? That's Torah. You're allowed to disagree. And Yoini, we know that there's a disagreement. We know that religious Zionism argues otherwise. Rabbi Yoel is challenging that argument. He's saying that if you go down to the core of the argument, nationalism is not the cause for being Jewish. Yes, sir.
I'm not, by any ways a Buckian like Rav Kook, but I find it hard to believe that Rav Kook would say being a nationalist makes you Jewish. He knows what makes a yid, and I don't see this. I would need to see more a historical record that this is what the religious Zionists really believe. Oh, okay, you live in Eretz Israel, you're a yid. Not that it's a process, but I can't see like a Rav Kook.
Right. Well,
this kind of belief.
Well, again, I can't cite for you right now. Look at this page, but it's known that the right-wing Orthodox from Yeshivish Hasidish world banned Rav Kook's Shita. I mean that's known. That's not me telling you a chiddush. You know that, right? I'll give you an example. Rabbi Hutner, who of Chaim Berlin, Yoini's black, dark childhood in yeshiva experience in Chaim Berlin. But Rabbi Hutner from the yeshiva, he was related to Rav Kook. And this I have in writing, and I've written about it, but I found the sources. In his first sefer that came out, Nu Pachad Yitzchak, there's a haskama from Rav Kook. A Kuf gave him a haskama, not on the sefer Pachad Yitzchak, on the sefer Nezer something, I forget the name now, that he wrote when he was a young man, and he was blown away. Him and Reb Chaim Oizer, he was going. It was a big Talmud Chacham. They took it out. In the second printing, they removed the haskama from Rav Kook. Number 2. And this I heard from people who were there. I'm not telling you a mice I heard in his sukkah. In Brownsville, he had a picture of the Rav Kook, and I think of the Balatanya. A few years later, the picture of Rav Kook was gone. And it wasn't vandals who ripped it down. The pressure of the Olam HaTorah that was being developed in American Eretz Yisrael, it wasn't popular. So the people, probably said, hey, look, you want to score points. We want to be recognized. We want to be a mainstay yeshiva. Put the Rav Kook in the bag. Just put it in the bag. And one more point I'll tell you. And again, I didn't see this, but this you can ask anyone. They should know it. And that is that they say that Rav Kook said, someone who plows and plants the land of Eretz Yisrael is as holy as someone who sits in Beis Medrash or in a kollel. You've heard that or never heard that? That I heard, from childhood. Again, did he say it? When did he say it? How did he say it? I don't know. So what I'm saying, it's not that Rav Kook that he didn't know what Torah is, a Yiddish Torah. Of course he did. He's talking about a great mensch, a big person. The question is, and what Rabbi Yoel is analyzing here, is what is, in other words, like this. If Rav Kook is saying when you plant the earth, the planting of the earth as a yid, because the Torah tells you to plant the earth, that's fine. Rabbi Yoel is not arguing on that. The Rebbe is not arguing on that. The question is if you're saying, no, just by planting the earth, you're a Jew. And you're saying, sir, that it's hard for you to believe that Rav Kook would argue that. And I understand.
I would think Rav Kook would be saying mitzvah tzricha kavana, that they're doing they're fulfilling a mitzvah. Okay, they don't have the kavana that they're fulfilling a mitzvah.
Okay.
But they're doing something
Okay. And if that's it, it's matim to Shitas Chabad as Rabbi Yoel writes it here. No problem. But for some reason, and again, when he wrote it, I don't know what was going on in Mizrahi at the time. I don't know what was going on in Hagud at the time. It seems like at that time there still was a lingering of a Jewishness that didn't require total commitment to Torah, and that's what he's objecting to. Listen, Chevra, we're all benefactors of Chabad and the Rebbe's outreach and all that, etc., one way or the other, right? So if anyone loved a Jew, the Lubavitcher Rebbe loved a Jew. And this same Lubavitcher Rebbe had big issues with Zionism. So how do you, in other words, and we're going to see in a moment, let's say the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Shalom Ber, everyone says, oh, he was such an anti-Zionist, and that's why the Satmar say, we like that Lubavitcher Rebbe. If today's Lubavitcher Rebbe would have been like the Rashab, we would all go to him. And they're always saying, our Rebbe, the Satmar Rebbe, said there was one man that he regrets never meeting, which he would have wanted to meet, was the Rabbi Rashab. And why? Because he's so vigilant against the Zionists. And he was. And you look at his letters, you close your eyes. Because of what was going on in Russia in 1910s and 20s, those times. So they say the Rebbe, you should follow in your ancestors' steps, and since you're not the real McCoy. You're giving in. What Rabbi Yoel is going to show over here, the Rebbe doesn't give in. He never gave in. And trust me, he had a big problem with the Zionists, just like the Satmar and more. Yes, Moshe, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think, Rabbi Delva, I think it's important to clarify something, which is something Yoni Pister brought up. I think if we look at today at the mainstream religious Zionist camp, which is quite a range of, let's say, just level of halachic observance. I mean, some are, from more modern to all the way that are like Merkaz Arav, that are extremely serious religiously. But I think today, we look today, religion, any Rav, any halachic authority in the religious Zionist world would be completely, would say it's obvious that a person is Jewish if they're from a Jewish mother or they're a halachic conversion, etc. In other words, they're not gonna nobody's gonna say anything. They're just
I got
Jewish
it
because
okay.
And I think that being said, I think it's important to look specifically that today the differences are getting blurred, than what they were, like what you're saying in 1880, 1920. And I think today the main issue, at least from what I have seen, is that in a religious Zionist world, there is an emphasis on, number one, halachically, whether or not it's an actual mitzvah now to live in Eretz Yisrael. People are mechuyev to live in Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to, we'll say, a mitzvah reshut, if one can say that.
Yeah.
That's number one. And then following that, I think that this is really where the mainstream, let's call it the Hasidic, Yeshivish world, etc., has a problem that there's such an emphasis on living in Eretz Yisrael that it basically is basically there's sort of an unwritten code that says you have to come, a Jew has to come to Eretz Yisrael. We all know that the Rebbe said, obviously knew the beauty and the chashivas of Eretz Yisrael more than you could say maybe almost more than anybody, but we know that the Rebbe's attitude was, no, a Jew goes, I think Esther said this earlier, that a Jew goes where he can make an impact. And, I'm just sharing, I'm just saying this over because I think it's so critical to look at what is the issue, let's say now, today. In other words, secular Zionism to the political Zionism.
We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that.
The reason I'm just mentioning that is because when we talk about the issue of, let's say, a person just simply living there in Israel, and that makes him a Jew, religious Zionism doesn't say that, right? Secular Zionism maybe said that. I mean, I've said that. But I'm just saying that today we know that secular Zionism is like
right.
That's just
Anyway, I believe I addressed your point into Isser that if that's the Shita today, it's online. We're just discussing the idea that that's it. It is what it is. So if that's the Shita of religious Zionism today, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. It just seems to me from here that in the 1980s, when this was written, Rabbi Yoel felt that there still the Mizrahi and the Agudas, certain ones were still of not that opinion. That's all I could say. I don't know the inner makings, and it's 40 years later. Yes, sir.
I don't want to turn it into too much of a farbrengen, but this discussion just brings up memories of conversations that I would have when I was living in the United States in a very modern Orthodox community. And the state of Israel were doing many things which were contrary to halacha. And I would ask my religious Zionist friends, what takes precedence? Halacha and the Torah, or the good of the state? And they could not answer on the side of the Torah.
So
And I would say, how can you justify moving equipment on Shabbos because you don't want to come
Okay,
every
so-
day during the week?
and that-
How can you just
Right. So Moshe, that's your answer. You know, whatever. And if that changed, kol hakavod. I mean, listen, my wife's uncle, Rabbi Magnus, is a main Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva's Merkaz Arav, and he's a tremendous Yireh Shamayim Talmud Chacham, and and half and three quarters of a chassid. I'm just saying, but Isser, again, Isser, to be fair, you say religious Zionists, there's that modern element of religious Zionism of Teaneck, New Jersey, you know what I'm saying? That's one, or the five towns, today five towns already is more right-wing, certain ones, but yeah, it is. Let's learn a little more insight. Do we have a time? I don't know. What time is it now? I don't know the time.
it's,
3:12.
Okay, a few more minutes. So we're in the second paragraph. As the Rebbe's Masber later, has no connection whatsoever with the nationalism of the Zionists. On the contrary, this idea is the total opposite, and it's a war against Shittas HaTzionis. Someone doesn't have any brains in his head, and he sees everything very superficially. They could badmouth Lubavitch, they'll badmouth Lubavitch and Mizrahi and Aguda in B'chad HaMachta is one breath. In the same breath. But Amru, my Beneilu Leilu, what's the difference between Lubavitch and Aguda and Mizrahi? This is the sheet of the Satmar, no? Of the Harishneim, Lubavitch, with Mizrahi, Aguda, they say the same thing. Shagam Poishi Yisrael and Yehudim, that also sinners of Israel are Jews, and therefore they're totally disregarding Torah being the Ikar. The Rebbe says, when you take a little time, you reflect, you sit back, and you be more objective, you see. Mizrahi and Aguda, you see the word? Mechaskim. They give strength to Zionism, to Zionism. Mashenkin Lubavitch, lechemes neged to Zionism. Now, I know this is not popular today in most Chabad houses. Trust me. If they see this, they're going to cover their head in embarrassment. Nothing to be embarrassed about. The Rebbe and Chabad is neged Zionism. Finished. There's no gray. It's very black and white. Now, you want to, doesn't mean you shouldn't live in Eretz Yisrael, or you should. By the way, I told you this, it's worth mentioning again. Not only was the Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is the father figure of YU and everything else, right? Right? When Rabbi from Efrat, the Rav. Rabbi Riskin came to his Rebbe, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he says, Rebbe, I'm making Aliyah, I want to make Aliyah, do you give me a bracha? He said, no. He says, we need you here. Where are you running away? After he told him and this and that, he said, go. Or maybe even told him, go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, ask him, I forget, it's written up. Riskin himself tells the story. My point is that this isn't just a Chabad thing. This was a certain Shita, whether it was Brisker or Soloveitchik or Lubavitcher, that again, and let me say this, and this maybe will support what Moshe said. If the Zionism is the way maybe it is today in the religious camps, both Soloveitchik and the Rebbe wouldn't have a problem with it. But that's the question. If it's the what?
No, the thing they would have the problem with, what we're talking about, is that issue, and I didn't mention this, where you said like in the tefillah, like the tefillah, the Medinas Yisrael, it's like the status.
Okay. Oh, that's for sure. Reishis Gula Seder for sure. But I'm saying, if it's the Zionism that Isser mentioned before, they would have a problem with. If it's the Zionism that you spoke about, Moshe, forget about the Reishis Gula Seder, because that they both would have a problem with, and all times never seen no question about it, because that's negative Rambam. The Rambam doesn't say there's no schal to the Geula. But I'm saying, take that issue away from me. That's the beginning of redemption. If there's a religious lifestyle, and that's your Mabit Chaim, that's your perspective, kol hakavod. Let me just finish the paragraph. So he says, when you look carefully, you see that Mizrahi and Aguda support Zionism. Masha'enkin, conversely, Lubavitch, lechemed neged Zionism. One more paragraph. When you come to a Jew, you tell the Jew. What do you tell the Jew? Yisrael, even though he sinned, he's a Jew, without explaining what we said earlier in Yiddish. Legt sich by him up. Legt sich up means it resonates by him. The inyan Yisrael, the inyan Chet, einum seisem zelazeh. The concept, Abraham, of being a Jew and being a sinner, it's not a problem. And what further comes from this thinking is the hashkafa, the inyan Yisrael, that Torah observance and Torah lifestyle and Torah being the essence and the idea of being a Jew are two separate things. And as is the underlying shita of nationalism, Yehudi, Russi, Tzarfati, therefore it has nothing to do with religion. What happens? This hashkafa, this ideology prevents him from doing tshuva. Why should you have to do tshuva? You're telling me that even now, I'm a Jew, even though I sinned, and therefore, what do I have to do tshuva? וכמבואר במכתב הידוע של רבינו מרש"ב, and as we as known from the letter of the Rashab, שנתפס בקונטרס המים, we learned Kuntres Hamayim, we didn't learn the letter, but over there, the Hebrew volume, there's the letter is printed, איך ששיטה סציונית לאומיות, how the shita of Zionism, nationalism, mona mahar b'nei Yisrael lasses tshuva. And this you have to understand, Chevra, and this historically, and this is written, Zionism, okay? Again, Moshe, yes, we are talking about 1900, 1880, 1890, 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930. Those years gave Jews an out. And you can't imagine how it impacted the most frum boys of Slabodka and Chabad and here and there. Chabad less, but it was a whole current. And you had what to grab onto. Look at the pictures on the net. Look, you see, secular. No yarmulkes, no this, no that. They danced the horror and all that. Zionists, Israel, Eretz Yisrael, right now, you know. So the Rebbe says, the Rashab says, that if you interpret Afal Pish Yisrael Chotahu with the sheet of Zionism, if that's what your understanding is, why should you do tshuva? Why should you do tshuva? And Taka, that's the way it was. They became not religious, and they felt very proud of being Jews because they were Zionists. It was a very sensitive klipa. I'm sorry to say that. I know my father, grew up in Romania, and after the war, they had like a Zionism was so powerful, and it schlepped you in. So you didn't need to remain religious. The religion wasn't relevant, and this was at the core. Now again, if the core changed, no problem. But Reb Yoel believes, at least in the 1980s, the core hasn't changed. The core idea hasn't changed. And just for a moment, and we finish now, is you take our kids, children, and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, future generations. We talk about going to the army, right? So, again are you going to the army because of nationalism? Or are you going to the army because the Eibishter says that we need Eretz Yisrael and we need to protect Eretz Yisrael? You understand? It's two different ways of going to the army. And I assume the Nachal Haredi and that camp, that's their belief. I believe that's versus listen, the French have an army, the Russians have an army, right? Israel needs an army too. And so when you have a shul that opposes the saying of the Tfilas HaMedina, for example, the opposition is because they believe, again, Reishis Gula Seinu, but that just going to the army, you're holy. And that's what this letter is clarifying, that's what we're against. Not against the kernel issue that a Yid is a Yid. And if that becomes your Shita, no problem. And you know that the Rebbe, just for the record, the Rebbe was not for kids running, getting excuses and getting out of the army. Of course, he preferred you should learn, but he didn't have that shita where, and Takadu Chevra Lubavitchers, that I'm talking about in the last 60 years, from 1948. Not recently in the 20, 30 years, Nachal Haredi, I'm talking about before. So it's a very delicate issue. Yes, Moshe.
I just want to say, just regarding the last point, first of all, today you see more and more Lubavitchers, young guys that are going to the army.
Right.
That's my son tells me, that's what I hear. My sons have told me that. You see that more and more. But what's also interesting that you see also, my understanding is more and more Chabad houses all over the world. When it comes to Kriyas Torah and Shabbos, they said the Mishaberach for Tzahal, for the army here.
Right, but they say it for Tzahal. They're very careful which Mishaberach they make.
Yeah, I know, but I understand that.
And if it's not, what's wrong to give a bracha? You know what I'm saying? What the Chabad Rav and the Chabad house means with the Misha Berach is not necessarily what the Zionists behind him sitting and standing thinks.
I understand, but again, I'm saying,
I'm not saying I didn't do it in my Chabad house because I come from a different school. It's hard for me to.
But that's what I'm trying to say. That's exactly the point. 30 years ago, Chabad houses weren't doing that.
Right.
Now, like look at JLI. I mean, we all know JLI, the main.
Yeah.
You guys can look it up online. They bring, every 2 years. I mean, COVID, they took a break, but they bring these huge missions here in Israel, and it's powerful. The talk that's it. It's powerful, and they go to Hebron, and they go to army bases, and they go to.
That's all fine. What's wrong?
Yeah. I'm just saying. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm saying when we look at that's what I'm trying to say. That I think things today are definitely not like 1920. Definitely not like 1980. It's.
I can hear it. Listen, every issue. Remember the rabbi from Rabbi Myers from the next door to Ish Kodesh. He's one of the leaders of one. In going up to the Harabayit. Now that's a very controversial issue, as you all know. So all of these issues. Now Rabbi Myers is a strong Shaibatayru mitzvahs, okay, and he's a Talmud Chacham. I'm just saying. So his going to Harabayit is one ideology. The question, since the issue becomes murky, well, do we say everyone in Eish Kodesh should do that, and it has to be done, I'm saying what's going on? So we say no. You want to go? It's your own thing. We're not going to make a shita out of it and say that you're a bad Jew if you don't go the chulu. Or, you're not living up to your potential, and, because we know the halachic issues of where you're stepping and what you're doing and all that. All I'm saying is that this is where we have, disagreements. But it's fine. It's fine. Hey, wearing tchelis. The Ratzmina Rebbe in Poland argued that he knows what tchelis is. And therefore, people in his Hasidim wore tchelis in Poland. Most others say we don't know for sure, and yet Rabbi Avram Twersky, who I think you will all agree was a fine Jew, and an Orthodox Jew, and a Hasidic Jew, he wore tchelis. He was convinced, Rabbi Twersky was convinced that this is correct. And we, you guys knew him, and I knew him. He wasn't a puppet. He was a learned man in everything, and he was a scholar. And I'm sure he studied the whole sugya of tchelis, and he came to the conclusion that it's fine, no problem. Yes, Hillel.
I once heard him say something along the lines of well, it couldn't hurt.
Okay.
That, we maybe didn't know for sure, but it couldn't hurt.
Fine.
Didn't hurt.
Fine. What I'm saying is, you talk to many others, what are you hacking a chinik? Where you drain a cup, Many guys saying to be ordained. What, your grandfather, the Stipler Rebbe, or the Tolna Rebbe, or the Skvera Rebbe, or the Chernobyl Rebbe, they wore tchelis. What are you doing? And believe me, he got a lot of flack for it, trust me. So, we need to, the derech klal, you should know. The Shita of Lubavitch, going back, I share with you, Chevra, 200 years of Lubavitch, not just the popular list the last 20 years, with the big signs and the publicity. I'm going to the core, to the Sfarim. The Shita of Lubavitch, of Chabad, is live and let live. Live and let live. If an individual is motivated in a certain way, the derech klal, no problem. But when you go and you start making shittas and you start saying it has to be this way, that's a whole other genre of an experience, and that's where it becomes very, very controversial, But as an individual, take for example, we mentioned the Avi, the Sefer Rav Tachtel. What's the name of the Sefer?
Aim
Aim Habani. Aim Habani. Chevra, do you know what you're talking about? You're talking about a Hungarian Talmud Chacham who comes from the same, world as Kloisenberg and Satper and Munkac and that whole genre of individuals who we know about, right? And he goes and writes and says that we have to think about Eretz Yisrael and we have to look at it and everything else. And that's when they say, whoop, stop. You were good till now. Now you're going. So they throw him out, and the Gedolim and the literature did the same thing with Rabbi Soloveitchik. You're good till now, but as soon as you start with a little modernity or accepting modernity or giving heterim that they didn't like, you become a pariah. And it's lav dafke. It's lav dafke. It's not necessarily so. Because these individuals were totally committed to their shita, all that, but they were honest people. Rabbi Soloveitchik argued, this was his argument. After the Holocaust, he said, he was not Goodist. Rabbi Soloveitchik was not Goodist. And then he said, after the Holocaust, I came to understand and realize that Hashem wants something else. That's what he came to with his brains. That's it. You don't have to go along with them, but he was an honest person. The Rebbe, who was very much a traditionalist, he announced different things that his father-in-law and the Rashab didn't. And the Rebbe clearly said, the time requires this approach now. And he would show how if the Rashab lived in that time or the previous Rebbe, they would, he didn't say this, but this was intimated in his words, they would support this. Because he followed them, because he saw himself as a successor, and he wouldn't be an innovator. Nevertheless, this was the case. I heard this from Reb Yoel. Professor Don Seaman, my friend from Emory, right, the Jewish Studies history professor, he told me, and this was when I brought him to Reb Yoel to have a discussion. So he said to Reb Yoel, what the Rebbe speaks about 7 Noachide mitzvahs, reaching out. He says, we never saw this in Judaism. And he relates to it. He's a kippas ruganik, he has no problem with it. But he's looking at the bigger picture. Since when do we make a campaign to go out and teach people 7 mitzvahs b'nei noyach? So Rabbi Yoel explained to him, he said, listen, when I was a boy, to go out on not Dizengoff, on that next street, the popular street next to Dizengoff, and tell him, not Ben Yehuda, forget, whatever.
Allenby.
Thank you, Allenby. He says, to go out in Allenby and stop someone to put on tefillin, you would be out of your mind. It just wasn't done. We had Yiddishist and the secularists. He says, when I was growing up in Tel Aviv, he says, and the Rebbe Taka didn't speak about going out to Allenby in 1952 and 53, because the time wasn't right. But then as things were going to the right more and more, the Rebbe said, go out to Allenby, without saying those words. Go out to the boondocks. Go out to Albuquerque. Go out here and there. Why? Because now there was a change from the Eibishter. Hashem says, now the time is right. So therefore, now in 1983, when the Rebbe announced the whole idea of Sheva Mitzvah Noach, the Eibishter, now the time is right for Sheva Mitzvah Bnei Noach. But it's not that the idea is invalid. The idea was always kosher. But then the world wasn't a vessel for it, and now the world is a vessel for it. And guess what? A lot of people say, we disagree. No problem. Disagree. Everyone's entitled to their shita and what they, but don't tell me that his point was, he was telling to Don Seaman, he was telling him that it's a chidush, but it's a chidush that has its core in Torah, and in the realm of Kiruv, but just that time the world wasn't ready, and now the world is ready, and that's the difference. That's all. So Taka, during the Rashab's times, the Rashab had to take a more vigilant opposing view to Zionism, because Zionism was killing our youth. And they said, we have Zionism, we don't need to be religious. Look at all pictures in all of our families, including my own. The beard went off, the yarmulkes went off, the sheitlach went off, and they started to dance, and horas and shmoras and boras, and nothing, and garnished. And what happened? Their kids weren't religious, and then they married out many, and in Petaluma, I think I told you, Petaluma in Marin County, where I was in Marin County. Petaluma is the next county over. It was a conservative shul, had pictures in the hallway, in the social hall, all Yidden, 1920s, because they wanted to make over there the chicken farms, the kibbutzim. Where are their kids, I asked. There was still some older, I remember I contacted them. They're Lutherans. Shoy. We have Lutherans from this Zionism Shita. Lutherans. Garnish geblieben. Nothing remained. Garnish. You gotta see the pictures. Hundreds of people in social hall, playing cards, having a good time, all Yidden. What happened to grandkids and great-grandkids? This pocket. Finished. Rahman litzlan. Yes.
In Petaluma, they became deadheads.
Oh yeah, what, the Petaluma is the seat of the deadheads?
That's the heart and soul of the Grateful Dead Society.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, I thought it was Berkeley. So it's not Berkeley, it's Petaluma. Okay. Anyway, Chevra, good farbringen, good conversation. See everyone tomorrow. Zionism. Shalom.